The evening air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers and distant city lights. Inside a grand concert hall in San Francisco, people gathered for what promised to be an unforgettable night of music and charity. Among the attendees sat Sundar Pichai, a man whose name might not have meant much to everyone in the room but whose work had touched billions around the globe. Yet here he was, blending seamlessly into the crowd, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, looking like any other guest enjoying a rare moment away from his demanding schedule. Sundar wasn't one to seek attention outside of professional settings. In fact, those who knew him well often described him as reserved, thoughtful, and deeply introspective. Tonight, however, he'd made an exception. A friend had convinced him to attend the event, promising that it would be a low-key gathering, where no one would recognize him, and so far that promise seemed to hold true. No one gave him a second glance as he sipped his drink and listened to the opening acts, a local band playing lively tunes that filled the space with energy. As the evening progressed, the MC took the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with enthusiasm, "we've got a special treat for you tonight. We're inviting volunteers from the audience to join us on stage for a little karaoke session. Who's brave enough to give it a shot?" A ripple of excitement spread across the room. Some attendees exchanged eager glances, while others shook their heads, laughing at the idea of stepping onto the stage. The MC scanned the crowd, pointing randomly at different sections. "How about you, sir? Or maybe, you over there?" Each suggestion drew laughter and playful teasing among friends. It was all lighthearted fun, until the spotlight landed on Sundar. "Hey, how about this gentleman right here?" the MC called out, gesturing towards Sundar. The room erupted in giggles, assuming the unassuming figure seated quietly in the corner must have been chosen purely for comedic effect. After all, he didn't look like someone who belonged on stage. With his casual attire and understated demeanor, he seemed more like the type to sit in the back and observe rather than take center stage. Sundar felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward him. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure whether to laugh along or politely decline. Around him, whispers grew louder. "Oh, come on, he looks like he wouldn't even know the lyrics," someone joked, prompting another round of chuckles. Others chimed in, clearly entertained by the absurdity of the situation. "Yeah, go ahead, buddy. Show us what you've got." For a brief moment, Sundar considered staying put. This wasn't part of the plan. He hadn't come here to perform or draw attention to himself. But then again, when was the last time he'd done something completely spontaneous? His days were usually packed with meetings, strategy sessions, and high-stakes decisions. There was rarely room for anything unexpected. Maybe this was his chance to break free from the predictable rhythm of his life, even if just for a few minutes. Still, doubt lingered. What if he embarrassed himself? What if the crowd's initial amusement turned into outright mockery? These thoughts swirled in his mind as he weighed his options, but deep down, something else stirred. A quiet determination to prove that appearances can be deceiving. Perhaps it was the memory of growing up in India, where music had always been a universal language that brought people together regardless of background or status. Or maybe it was simply the challenge of stepping outside his comfort zone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sundar made his decision. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he stood up. The room fell silent for a split second before erupting into cheers and applause, not because they believed in him, but because they thought they were witnessing the setup for a hilarious failure. Sundar offered a small, self-deprecating smile as he made his way to the stage, feeling the heat of countless curious gazes following his every move. Once on stage, he accepted the microphone handed to him by a member of the staff. "Do you already have a song picked out?" the MC asked, leaning closer with a grin. Sundar shook his head, scanning the screen displaying available tracks. His fingers hovered, uncertain, freezing, unsure which option to choose. Then, almost instinctively, he selected a classic Indian melody, "Ae Dil Hai Mushkil." As the familiar opening notes began to play, the audience settled into their seats, ready to witness what they assumed would be yet another awkward amateur performance. But what happened next would leave them speechless and forever change the way they viewed the quiet man who had walked onto the stage that night. As Sundar stood on the stage, gripping the microphone with both hands, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. On one hand, there was nervousness. After all, he wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this, especially not in front of a room full of strangers who clearly thought they were about to witness something hilariously bad. On the other hand, though, there was a tiny spark of excitement, an unfamiliar thrill that came from stepping so far outside his comfort zone. For once, he wasn't the CEO making calculated decisions or leading meetings. He was just a man standing on a stage ready to take a risk. The music began to play, soft and melodic, filling the room with its gentle rhythm. The opening notes of Ae Dil Hai Mushkil drifted through the air, instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Bollywood classics. It was a song known for its emotional depth and complexity, often performed by trained singers with years of experience. To the audience, it seemed almost laughable that someone like Sundar, a tech executive dressed in jeans and a hoodie, would attempt such a challenging piece. A few people exchanged amused glances, while others leaned forward slightly, curiosity piqued despite their skepticism. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He needed to block out the noise, the whispers, the giggles, the judgmental stares, and focus on the music. As a child growing up in India, he had spent countless evenings listening to songs like this one, sung by legends whose voices could stir the soul. Back then, music had been more than entertainment. It was a way to connect with family, friends, and even strangers. It transcended language, culture, and social barriers, bringing people together in ways words alone never could. And now, as he stood on that stage, Sundar realized he wasn't just singing for himself. He was singing for everyone who had ever felt underestimated or overlooked. When he finally opened his mouth to sing, the first note caught everyone off guard. His voice wasn't shaky or hesitant like they had expected. Instead, it was smooth, steady, and surprisingly rich, carrying a warmth that immediately drew the audience in. There was no trace of the awkward amateur they had anticipated. Instead, they heard confidence, not arrogance, but quiet assurance, as if Sundar knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. The lyrics flowed effortlessly, each word infused with emotion. Sundar's tone conveyed a depth of feeling that resonated deeply with those listening. Even those unfamiliar with the original version of the song could sense the raw honesty in his performance. He didn't try to mimic the theatrical flair of professional singers. Instead, he sang with authenticity, letting the melody guide him rather than overpowering it. Every note felt genuine, every pause deliberate. It was as if he were telling a story, one of love, longing, and resilience, that transcended the boundaries of language and culture. At first, the crowd didn't know how to react. Some people sat frozen in their seats, mouths slightly agape, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, silently asking each other, "Is this real?" The initial wave of amusement quickly gave way to astonishment. No one dared to laugh now. Instead, the room grew eerily quiet, save for the sound of Sundar's voice echoing through the hall. It was a silence born not of boredom or indifference, but of awe, a shared recognition that something extraordinary was unfolding before their very eyes. Even the staff working behind the scenes stopped what they were doing to listen. One of the waiters paused mid-step, tray in hand, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. Another adjusted the lighting subtly, casting a soft glow over the stage that seemed to enhance the mood without distracting from the performance. The MC, who moments earlier had joked about Sundar's appearance, now stood at the edge of the stage, watching intently, his expression a mixture of disbelief and admiration. As the song progressed, Sundar appeared to grow more comfortable. His posture relaxed and his grip on the microphone loosened slightly. He swayed gently to the rhythm, completely absorbed in the moment. It was clear that he wasn't performing for applause or validation. He was simply sharing a part of himself with the world. That sincerity struck a chord with the audience, many of whom found themselves reflecting on their own lives. Some remembered loved ones they had lost, while others thought about dreams they had put on hold. Whatever personal connections they made, it was undeniable that Sundar's voice had touched something within them. By the time he reached the chorus, the transformation in the room was palpable. What had started as a light-hearted karaoke session had turned into something profoundly moving. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging onto every word. Tears welled up in the eyes of a woman sitting near the front, her hand pressed against her chest as if trying to steady her racing heart. A young couple held hands tightly, their faces illuminated by the soft golden lights overhead. Even the skeptics, the ones who had laughed hardest when Sundar first walked onto the stage, now wore expressions of wonder, their earlier mockery replaced by respect. And yet Sundar remained unfazed by the reaction he was eliciting. He continued singing as if nothing else existed beyond the music and the emotions it stirred. There was no grandstanding, no attempt to milk the moment for dramatic effect, just pure, unfiltered passion. It was as if he had tapped into something universal, reminding everyone present of the power of vulnerability and the beauty of embracing one's true self. When the final verse approached, the tension in the room was almost tangible. People held their breath, unwilling to miss a single note. Sundar's voice soared during the climactic lines, filling the space with a sense of hope and resolution. Then, as the last note faded away, silence descended once again. A silence so profound it felt almost sacred. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke. They simply sat there, processing what they had just witnessed, trying to reconcile the unassuming man on stage with the incredible talent they had just experienced. Sundar lowered the microphone slowly, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. He offered a small, humble smile to the audience, then stepped back, signaling that he was done. Without waiting for applause or acknowledgement, he walked off the stage, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as he had appeared. But the impact of his performance lingered long after he was gone, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had been fortunate enough to hear it. The room was still wrapped in a stunned silence, as if time itself had paused to let the audience absorb what they had just witnessed. Sundar's performance hadn't merely been good, it had been extraordinary. His voice carried a depth and emotion that seemed almost otherworldly, leaving everyone present struggling to reconcile the man they saw on stage with the unassuming figure who had walked up moments earlier. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air felt heavy with disbelief, awe, and a strange sense of collective guilt for having underestimated him so completely. It wasn't just the quality of his singing that left people speechless. It was the way he had poured his soul into every word. Each lyric seemed to resonate with personal meaning, as though Sundar wasn't just performing but sharing a piece of his inner world. The song, "E Dil Hai Mushkil," spoke of love, heartbreak, and resilience, themes that struck a universal chord. And yet hearing them delivered by Sundar added layers of complexity that went beyond the melody itself. His voice conveyed vulnerability, strength, and an undeniable authenticity that made it impossible not to feel connected to the moment. As the final note lingered in the air, the silence stretched on, broken only by the faint hum of the sound system winding down. People exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a mix of emotions, shock, admiration, and even regret. Some attendees sat frozen, their hands clasped tightly together, while others leaned back in their chairs, exhaling, deeply as if releasing pent-up tension. A woman near the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her mascara slightly smudged from tears she hadn't expected to shed. Beside her, a man whispered to his companion, "I don't think I've ever heard anything like that before." For many, the realization hit hard. They had judged Sundar too quickly. When he first stepped onto the stage, dressed casually and looking every bit like someone who didn't belong there, they had dismissed him without a second thought. They assumed he would stumble over the lyrics, fumble awkwardly, or perhaps even laugh off his own inability to perform. But instead, he had delivered something breathtaking, a performance so powerful that it transcended expectations and left them questioning everything they thought they knew about him. Even those who weren't familiar with Indian music found themselves deeply moved. The melody, though foreign to some ears, carried an emotional weight that needed no translation. One attendee, a middle-aged man visiting from Chicago, later confessed to his wife that he didn't understand the language of the song, but he understood its heart. "It was like he was speaking directly to me," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never felt anything like that at a concert before." Backstage, the staff members who had initially chuckled at Sundar's appearance now stood, frozen, staring at each other in disbelief. The stage manager muttered under her breath, "Who is this guy?" Another crew member quickly pulled out his phone, searching online for any clues about the mysterious singer. Within moments, whispers began to spread among the team. "Wait, isn't that Sundar Pichai, the Google guy?" Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The hoodie, the quiet demeanor, the humility, it all made sense now. But knowing his identity didn't diminish the magic of the moment. If anything, it amplified it. Here was one of the most influential figures in the tech world, standing on a small stage in San Francisco, pouring his heart out through a song that touched everyone present. Meanwhile, the audience was beginning to stir. Someone near the back clapped hesitantly at first, unsure whether it was appropriate to break the spell, but soon others joined in, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The applause built steadily, filling the room with a thunderous roar that echoed off the walls. It wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping you might hear after a routine act. It was a standing ovation, spontaneous and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, cheering and whistling, their earlier skepticism replaced by overwhelming admiration. Sundar, however, remained humble. He stood quietly by the side of the stage, watching the reaction unfold with a faint smile. There was no grand gesture, no sweeping bow or attempt to bask in the spotlight. Instead, he simply nodded his head slightly, acknowledging the applause, with grace and gratitude. To anyone watching, it was clear that this wasn't about seeking recognition or proving a point. Sundar had stepped onto the stage because he wanted to share a part of himself, not to impress anyone, but to connect with the people around him. But the connection went both ways. As the applause continued, many in the crowd began to reflect on their own lives. Some thought about times when they too had been underestimated or dismissed because of how they looked or acted. Others recalled moments when they had judged someone unfairly, based on superficial impressions rather than taking the time to truly see them. Sundar's performance served as a poignant reminder of the dangers of assumptions, the way we often box people into categories without realizing the richness and complexity hidden beneath the surface. One young woman, sitting toward the center of the room, leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Do you think he knew we were laughing at him earlier?" Her friend shrugged, biting her lip. "Probably. But look at him now. He hasn't said a word about it. That's what makes it so amazing." Indeed, Sundar's composure throughout the entire experience was remarkable. From the moment he walked onto the stage to the instant he stepped off, he carried himself with quiet dignity. There was no trace of bitterness or resentment, no attempt to call out the audience for their initial mockery. Instead, he let his actions speak for themselves, trusting that his performance would be enough to change their perceptions. And it worked. By the time he disappeared into the shadows, the laughter and jokes from earlier felt like a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of respect and admiration. As the applause finally began to subside, the MC returned to the stage, visibly shaken by what he had just witnessed. "Well," he said, his voice tinged with awe, "I don't think I need to say much after that. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up one more time for, He trailed off, unsure whether to use Sundar's name or simply refer to him as the gentleman who just blew us all away. Ultimately, he settled for a simple, heartfelt thank you, allowing the moment to stand on its own. In the days that followed, videos of Sundar's performance would go viral, sparking conversations about talent, humility, and the importance of giving people a chance to shine. But in that moment inside the concert hall, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the shared experience, the way a single song had brought an entire room of strangers together, reminding them of the beauty of art, the power of vulnerability, and the transformative potential of seeing people for who they really are, rather than who we assume them to be. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, more fervent, as if the audience couldn't get enough of what they had just experienced. People were on their feet now, clapping rhythmically, cheering, and whistling with uncontainable enthusiasm. Some even stomped their feet in approval, the sound reverberating through the hall like rolling thunder. Sundar stood quietly by the side of the stage, his expression calm but deeply touched. He hadn't expected this reaction. Not the standing ovation, not the overwhelming outpouring of emotion. Yet here it was, a tidal wave of admiration that swept over him and left him humbled. For a moment, he considered stepping back onto the stage to acknowledge the applause properly. But something held him back. This wasn't about basking in glory or seeking validation. It was about sharing a piece of himself and letting the music speak for him. So instead of returning to the spotlight, he simply nodded his head slightly, offering a small, grateful smile before retreating further into the shadows. His quiet dignity only added to the awe-inspiring nature of the moment. To those watching, it felt almost poetic, a man who had given so much yet asked for nothing in return. As the cheers finally began to die down, the MC returned to the microphone, visibly struggling to find words. "Wow," he said, shaking, his head in disbelief. I don't even know where to start. That was..." He paused, searching for the right phrase. "Unbelievable doesn't even begin to cover it." The crowd murmured in agreement, still buzzing with excitement. "Let's hear it one more time for..." "Well, honestly, I think we all know who that was by now." At this, a ripple of realization spread through the room. Phones were pulled out hastily, fingers tapping furiously as people searched online for confirmation of what many already suspected. The unassuming man who had just delivered the performance of a lifetime was none other than Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Whispers erupted everywhere. That was him. No way. How did we not recognize him earlier? As photos and videos circulated, the truth became undeniable. And with that revelation came a fresh wave of astonishment. People began piecing things together, the hoodie, the casual demeanor, the humility. Suddenly everything made sense. Here was one of the most powerful figures in the tech world, someone whose decisions impacted billions of lives daily, singing with such raw emotion on a small stage at a charity concert. It was the kind of story you'd expect to see in movies, or read about in books, but never in real life. Yet here it was, unfolding right before their eyes. Social media lit up within minutes. Attendees posted clips of Sundar's performance, tagging friends and urging them to watch. Comments flooded in from around the globe. "Is this real? OMG, I can't believe it's him." This is why I love humanity. People are full of surprises. Journalists scrambled to reach out for interviews while fans expressed their admiration in countless languages. By morning, hashtags like Sundar Sings and Your Unexpected Talent were trending worldwide. It seemed everyone wanted a piece of the story. But despite the frenzy, Sundar remained characteristically low-key. When reporters reached out for statements, he politely declined, choosing instead to release a brief message through his official channels. In it, he thanked the organizers of the event and expressed gratitude for the warm reception. "Music has always been a part of my life," he wrote. "It reminds me of home, of family, and of the connections we share as human beings. Last night I stepped onto that stage not to prove anything, but to celebrate those connections. If my performance inspired even one person to see others differently, to look beyond appearances and assumptions, then I consider it a success." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations far beyond the confines of the concert hall. People began reflecting on their own biases, recalling moments when they had judged someone unfairly based on superficial impressions. Social media threads filled with heartfelt stories of misjudgments turned into lessons. One user shared how she once dismissed a coworker as too quiet to contribute, only to discover later that the same individual was a brilliant problem solver. Another recounted meeting a street musician who played with such passion that it changed her perspective on talent and perseverance. Sundar's performance served as a catalyst for these reflections, reminding everyone of the importance of giving people a chance to shine. Back at the concert, the energy in the room remained electric long after Sundar had left. Attendees lingered, reluctant to let go of the magic of the evening. Conversations buzzed with excitement as strangers bonded over their shared experience. A group of young professionals huddled near the bar, debating whether Sundar's voice could rival professional singers. Nearby, an older couple sat holding hands, reminiscing about concerts they had attended decades ago. Even the staff members, usually focused on logistics, found themselves caught up in the moment discussing how rare it was to witness something so authentic and moving. One attendee, a local artist named Maya, approached the MC during a break. "You know," she said, her eyes shining with inspiration, "this is exactly why art matters. It breaks down walls. It makes us see each other differently. Tonight, we laughed because we thought we knew who he was. But then he showed us who he really is. And isn't that what art is supposed to do? Reveal truths we didn't know existed?" Her words struck a chord with everyone who heard them. Indeed, Sundar's performance had done more than entertain. It had challenged perceptions, sparked introspection, and reminded people of the beauty of embracing vulnerability. For a few fleeting minutes, he had transformed a light-hearted karaoke session into a profound lesson about humanity. By the end of the night, the concert had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a simple charity event had become a cultural moment, a testament to the power of authenticity and the unexpected ways in which ordinary evenings can turn extraordinary. As attendees filed out of the venue, many stopped to thank the organizers, their faces glowing with satisfaction. Others linger quien solicta. In the days that followed the concert, Sundar Pichai's impromptu performance became the talk of the town, and then some. The video clips shared online racked up millions of views within hours, with comments pouring in from every corner of the globe. People marveled not just at his vocal talent but at the humility and grace with which he had carried himself throughout the entire experience. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Swar Sundar Sings and Our Hidden Talents, as users eagerly dissected every aspect of the night. Memes began circulating, many of them playful yet respectful, capturing the collective awe that Sundar's unexpected moment had inspired. For many, the story went beyond entertainment. It served as a powerful reminder of how often we underestimate others based on appearances or preconceived notions. Countless posts reflected on this theme, with people sharing personal anecdotes about times they had misjudged someone or been misjudged themselves. A teacher wrote about a student who seemed disengaged in class but later revealed a hidden passion for poetry. A manager recounted hiring an intern who appeared shy during interviews but turned out to be a brilliant strategist. These stories underscored a universal truth. There is always more beneath the surface than meets the eye. The media couldn't get enough of the story either. News outlets around the world ran features on Sundar's performance, framing it as a lesson in authenticity and the importance of embracing one's true self. Journalists reached out for interviews, hoping to capture his thoughts on the viral sensation he had inadvertently created. But true to his nature, Sundar remained reserved. He politely declined most requests, opting instead to focus on his work and family. When pressed for a statement, he released a short, thoughtful message. "We live in a world where labels and assumptions shape our interactions. Last night reminded me, and hopefully others, that these labels can blind us to the beauty of discovering someone's true potential. Let's celebrate differences and find joy in the unexpected." His words resonated deeply, sparking discussions in schools, workplaces, and households worldwide. Teachers used the story as a teaching moment, encouraging students to look past stereotypes and appreciate individuality. Corporate leaders cited Sundar's actions as an example of leadership through humility, urging employees to embrace vulnerability rather than fear it. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about the incident, using humor to highlight its broader significance. "If Sundar Pichai can belt out a Bollywood classic after everyone laughed at him," one host quipped, "then maybe we should all stop underestimating each other." but perhaps the most profound impact was felt by those who had been present that night. For them, the memory of Sundar's performance wasn't just a viral moment. It was a transformative experience. Attendees described feeling a renewed sense of connection to humanity, as if the evening had stripped away barriers and allowed them to see each other more clearly. One woman, a mother of two, shared how the event inspired her to enroll in a local choir despite years of self-doubt. "If Sundar could step onto that stage and sing with such courage," she said, "then why shouldn't I try something new too?" Others found themselves reflecting on their own lives, questioning whether they had ever dismissed someone unfairly. A man named David posted a heartfelt essay on LinkedIn, recounting how he had once mocked a colleague for suggesting an unconventional idea during a meeting. Years later, that same idea revolutionized their company. "I realized last night," David wrote, "that we're all guilty of judging too quickly. Sundar's performance reminded me that greatness often hides in plain sight, and it's up to us to recognize it." Even the organizers of the charity concert were caught off guard by the response. What had started as a modest fundraising event had blossomed into something far greater, a cultural phenomenon that transcended borders and brought people together. They received messages from donors pledging additional funds, inspired by the spirit of unity and discovery that Sundar's performance embodied. Some attendees returned to the venue weeks later, leaving notes of gratitude and small tokens of appreciation. One note read simply, "Thank you for reminding us to listen, not just to music, but to each other." As time passed, the initial frenzy surrounding Sundar's performance gradually subsided, yet its legacy endured. Educators incorporated the story into lessons about empathy and open-mindedness. Musicians referenced it as proof that art has the power to bridge divides and heal wounds, and countless individuals drew inspiration from Sundar's willingness to take a risk, even when faced with skepticism. His decision to step onto that stage, despite knowing he might fail, became a symbol of courage and authenticity in a world that often rewards conformity over individuality. Years later, whenever Sundar Pichai's name came up in conversation, people didn't just think of Google or his achievements in technology. They remembered the night he walked onto a small stage in San Francisco, stood before a room full of doubters, and sang a song that silenced laughter and ignited hearts. It was a moment that transcended titles and accomplishments, showcasing the quiet strength of a man who understood the value of staying grounded and the power of sharing your truth with the world. In the end, Sundar's performance wasn't just about music. It was about connection. It reminded everyone who witnessed it that we are all capable of surprising ourselves and others if given the chance. And it challenged us to create spaces where people feel safe enough to reveal their hidden talents, passions, and dreams. Because sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the simplest acts of bravery and the willingness to let someone shine even when you least expect it.